5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
How about we do it again?
6, 7, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think I farted.
Okay, let's try one more
I
time.
definitely.
Ready?
I can move you. Making review. Making review.
Say 6,
6,
5,
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to episode 26 of Rank and Review. This episode, your host and random Canadian Larry Parsons and his guest Robbie Tanner will be looking at 6 horror films that use frozen landscapes and the cold to their advantage. Living in Canada and specifically in the middle of Saskatchewan, cold is something that Robbie and I know a lot about. As usual, I would warn everyone listening that there will be spoilers for the movies discussed, as well as coarse language. I'd like to thank you for supporting Rank and Review, and if you'd like to help us out, you can seek us out on Facebook, like the page, leave a comment, and subscribe to us in iTunes in the podcast feed. It is free, and if you give us a good review and write a little review to us, it helps other people find the show. I don't know where you are when you're listening to this, but if you're warm, you'll enjoy and relax while listening to tales of people suffering in terrible, terrible cold. And if you're cold, you might want to grab yourself a blanket. Sit back, relax, and enjoy episode 26 of Rank and Review. Alright, well, so this is going to be episode 26 of Rank and Review, and I've got my dear friend Robbie Tanner in my filthy garage with me to discuss 6 horror movies set in frozen landscapes. Tanner and I have done so much theater together that I regale him with stories about plays that we were in together. Did I ever tell you about the time that I did this play, James and the Giant Peach?
Yes, I was in it too.
That's right, you were there, sorry. To be fair, I did almost die of heat stroke in that production. So yeah, I roped you into doing my podcast. How do you feel about the horror genre as a rule? Is it something that's typical to your taste, or as a rule, if you're going to the cinema, would you pick horror over something else? Or
I don't necessarily go for movies based on genre. I go based on whether I think they're going to be good or not. The ones when they get too detailed, they go too far, or somehow they they explain too much, then they become almost campy as opposed to real horror. Like Paranormal Activity, for example, certainly the first one didn't over-explain it. And
it just was unsettling.
Yeah, yeah. And lots of the jump scares and things like that, but some real craftsmanship leading up to the jump scare, I thought. And then they kind of, I think I saw up to the third one, but then the third one, it kind of became this thing where they were explaining too much this community and what the rules are behind this supernatural world, and it delved into it too much. There was another one.
Yeah, I call this problem like the Matrix flaw. The first Matrix movie is amazing because
they could have just left it alone.
We don't know what's going on, and we're introduced to the world, and Neo becomes the one, and then we wait 4 or 5 years or whatever it is for the sequel with bated breath. But once Neo is the one, it's not as interesting.
Right.
It's getting to that point, right?
Yeah.
So
you already know that heading in.
Yeah, exactly. But sequels are a tricky thing to do just generally. Anyway, we should mention the 6 movies we're going to talk about today. I think one of the great things about this list of movies actually is that you got a lot of different styles. I mean, you could fairly call all of these horror movies, but I think that's where a lot of the comparisons begin and end, as far as their approach to how they're going to try and work your nerves. We have a sort of cruel fate horror movie called Frozen, which is directed by Adam Green, about 3 unlucky skiers who get stuck on a lift. We have yet another Nazi zombie movie, Dead Snow. This is not the first Nazi zombie to be reviewed on this podcast. we have a very well-respected slasher movie called Cold Prey, about another group of skiers who get sort of sidelined. One of them gets a broken leg, and they take refuge in a remote, abandoned ski lodge. And guess what? Bad shit starts to happen. We have a creepy ghost story film called Wind Chill, starring Emily Blunt. And we have based off of a graphic novel, 30 Days of Night, sort of vampires sieging an Alaskan town. And last but not least, we have The Last Winter, which is directed by a man named Larry Fessenden. That's the list of movies that we're looking at. So you got everywhere between screaming, ripping your guts out zombies to sort of situational survival horror to sort of slow nerve working into the atmosphere type of films. Is there an approach that you prefer, or?
Well, like I said, the ones that, and I'm not saying that it's easy or it's trivial, and I don't mean to be too disparaging, but some people are just better at it than others, at creating the lead-in to whatever scene, climax, or the arc of the story as a whole. And then sometimes it's kind of like, we think we need to put this in. It seems like we need to have this opening scene to establish something that really doesn't matter later on.
It's weird. I mean, I guess the first act can be tricky. I guess it depends on where your script is at. If you're if you're in the machinations of telling the story, or if you're busy killing time until the creature shows up.
Right.
And there's those two different approaches. And sometimes it really does feel like the wheels are spinning, and just geez, get these boring people to the cottage in the woods already.
Yes.
But other times it's like, okay, we're getting to know these people, we like these people, and we're learning a little bit about them before they start to die.
And that's sort of, I think, sort of a necessary component of any well-crafted story, is if you want... It certainly takes the stakes up if you care about the characters and you sympathize with them and then something bad happens to them.
Just one more thing before we get into the reviews I wanted to bring up. The theme of cold in this. The handiest aspect that it has as far as the horror genre is isolation. And living where we live in Saskatchewan, this is, a lot of these movies could easily have been set here. But for me, what I associate with the cold theme is sort of less to do with like real scares and more to do with just the fact that because so much of our time here in Saskatchewan where we live, we are freezing. It is freezing cold. And because I'm not a sportsman, during the winter months is where I would hide in my darkened basement room and watch hours and hours of horror movies. And in a way, it justified my couch potatoism because it's 45 below outside.
And ironically, they make winter more palatable. They somehow take some of the edge of the horror away from the winter itself.
It's nice that it's summer as we're recording this, so we can have a detached view to all of these horrifying situations. But a lot of the stuff that they're portraying in here is stuff that I know. I know what it's like to be out in the freezing cold and shivering, so I can tell if those performances are real or not.
Exactly. And it's not easy to make winter more horrifying than it is.
Than it already is.
Because so many months of our hours in so many of our months of the year are spent putting on and taking off clothes and wondering, certainly when you're putting on, if it's enough.
Yeah.
And I imagine when you had your little guys, like, especially concerned about it.
Yeah,
I think it'd be warm enough in this. So yeah, winter is its own hardship, and people who haven't lived through one really don't get it. The weather will kill you.
Yeah.
We don't need wild animals, and we don't need...
Even if you're not an outdoorsman, if you're not someone who owns a skidoo or likes to go cut a hole in the ice and go fishing, I think living through Saskatchewan winter just toughens you.
I like to think so.
Not that we don't bitch constantly about how cold it is, but I think that when you go to other places and people complain about being cold,
I kind of prefer the bitching about it to the friendly, upbeat guy who goes, cold enough for you?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, if you live in Saskatchewan, you have to learn to love the cold. No, I don't. No, I don't. 45 below is ridiculous.
Yeah.
You guys sure about this?
Yeah, it works all the time. All you have to do is go over there and you say, like...
I said that I could pay for all 3 lift tickets, and then I left my credit card at the gas station.
Right.
Totally on money. Just not enough for all 3.
Last run, gotta make it count.
Okay, so we're going to start things off talking about a movie appropriately entitled Frozen. It's written and directed by Adam Green, who kind of made his name with this film called Hatchet, which is like an 87-minute sort of love letter to the 80s slasher movies.
Not to be confused with the Disney Frozen.
No, yeah.
Don't take your kids to this one.
No, there's no singing snowman in this version of Frozen. This is a very different Frozen. This concerns three friends played by Kevin Zegers, Sean Ashmore, and Emma Bell. So they turn around to this chairlift, and they're going up the side of the mountain just to catch one more ride down before they shut down. And there's a miscommunication. And the man who comes to replace the one who's operating the chairlift is told there's 3 more people on the mountain. And he promptly then sees 3 people skiing down the hill and turns off the chairlift, thus abandoning our 3 protagonists stranded in midair above this ski range. And they, as they realize and slowly take note of their situation, they're looking at 5 straight days in the freezing cold before that place is going to open up again, or they would be found, and they suddenly need to strategize a way to safety. Thus is the very non-supernatural premise of Frozen. What did you think?
Well, it as I recall, and as I said, I've written some notes here. There were some really nice opening shots establishing the scenery and the background, and I think most of them did that. There is, in spite of the stark coldness of the winter time, there is also a very stark, pristine, sort of pure beauty to it.
Absolutely.
Like like a shark, right? One of your favorite animals.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there is something about the starkness and the isolation and the feeling of sort of, if you're outside in that weather, you could be on your own.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of a good choice seasonally. And then the very next thing that happens is sort of one of my absolute least favorite ways of opening a film, is showing a bunch of young people in a vehicle talking stupid just to establish that it's young people and they're going away for a weekend. And that happened in a few of these. But they're just talking about nonsensical things, presumably as they would. I don't know, to give it give it a sense of realism, but to offset the thing later on, I don't know. But it's a very common sort of device, and I didn't twig to that at all.
It's tricky to establish sort of a getting to know you exposition scene without announcing itself as exposition. Right. So a lot of times the cheap thing is just to have them do witty banter in air quotes, right? And depending on how good your writer is, the banter works or it won't. Right. I just sort of took it as your standard getting to know you. We know that one of the guys is dating the Emma Bell character, but he's planning on breaking up with her.
That's another thing. There's almost always an odd number.
Yeah.
Because there has to be the smart-ass sort of foil who, judging by the way they act, it's no surprise that it's an odd number because you can't imagine anyone wanting to go out with them. Typically a male, right?
Yeah.
The smart-ass, wisecracking fifth wheel, if you will. Or
we talked about before the Cooper character in these movies,
Yeah.
from Night of the Living Dead, the character who's just constantly making things worse, saying the wrong thing, aggravating an already difficult situation. I don't think I was too hard on that, but because I have a rich appetite for horror movies, I often sort of understand that sometimes you gotta sort of slog through the first 20 minutes of these movies. I'm not making excuses necessarily for this movie either. I've seen way worse handling of character and exposition than this.
Sure.
I think what I would call it guilty is that they're kind of shallow. Like, all of the characters in their own way are false to each other.
Yeah.
They say one thing to each other and mean the other. They pretend like they really like each other, but there's obvious conflict, and they're obviously going to exploit that by locking the 3 of them in this chairlift together.
Right, and that's a necessary component because you need that point of conflict for sundry story arcs later on, or like those mini scene arcs.
But you also need people you're cheering for. When they get into the predicament, you, as an audience member, should want them to get out of it.
And sometimes I'm not. As a result of this, sometimes it's, like, come on, monster.
I can.
Because it's just a movie, I don't feel so bad about saying that. I wouldn't
absolutely.
say that about a real situation.
And if this is a monster movie, we paid our ticket price to see someone get eaten by a monster.
Yes.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
So we're complicit in the death in that result.
Everyone everyone knows it's like everyone can't get out alive,
Yeah.
right? And it's kind of, and sometimes writing short stories and things like that, I kind of feel bad because I build a character and then it's like, but I'm going to off them,
Yeah.
you know? And so you're kind of the creator and you're kind of a jerk.
You gotta take responsibility for that death.
Yeah.
There are problems in that I don't necessarily like all of these people for the most part, but I am able to get over it. Once they get into the situation that is increasingly dire, I'm starting to cheer for them because the idea of freezing to death next to a person that you blame for freezing you to death, or just that situation alone, you're cheering for them to get out of it. And then you have to start getting your head wrapped around, well, what would I do in that situation?
And as you mentioned, I think alluded to before, having direct experience with this, it's a little closer to home. You can sympathize with that would truly suck.
Yeah, and things that I wouldn't know. Like, if I was in that situation, I would have immediately probably tried to climb up to the wire and hand over hand to the next post and slide my way down or climb my way down. But apparently, this is true. I didn't know it until watching the movie. Those wires, although they look like they're like something you could grab hold of, are actually quite sharp, and they will cut right through your arm.
I was getting to that. That's actually false.
Is it?
Yes. That was one of my points about the believability is, if you think about it, those wires, those cables, they're going over, first of all, they're round cables, right? There's no reason to have an edge on them. So they're a bunch of little tiny round strands put into larger round strands, which are then kind of braided or wound into a longer or bigger long strand. First of all, there's no reason for them to be sharp. Secondly, if they were, the wheels would wear out faster.
Right.
So that was one thing, and I because it didn't make sense to me, so I did a little research on that. Those cables would not cut you
I just
at all.
pled ignorance because I didn't know. So I just took
No, that was one of the things I looked up because that one actually doesn't make sense to me.
But whether or not that was the case, I do think it would be the case that thing would be quite oily and very difficult to climb.
Right, because the less friction, the better.
Yeah, it would be very hard to get your grip on, let alone if you were cutting yourself on it. But what I was saying is that's where the movie works for me, is putting myself in their shoes. And I do get to the point where I'm sort of locked in with them and sort of like, shit, how are you going to get yourselves out of this situation? And what I will also give it points for is that Adam Green, like I said, his previous movie to this one, Hatchet, was not subtle. Like, this was like people being literally cut in half, fountains of blood and gore and tits and silliness and tongue-in-cheek. So you're all about Frozen. This is not that. He went a different direction.
There wasn't the camp with it. Yeah. No. But that was one of the things that lost me, because when I saw that happening, if you get jarred out of the suspension of disbelief and think I should make a note on that, then it's maybe failed as a device. Because that was just one thing that stood out to me, is like that really doesn't make sense.
I think that there's a movie that works for me mainly on its premise. I think that the actors are up and down. Depending on the scene, and I believe the situation more or I don't.
Right.
I guess I understand the point psychologically, and we're going to get into some spoilers here, where the person would be driven to just say, fuck it, I'm going to jump.
Oh, yes.
As opposed to just sitting here and freezing to death.
There's that sort of point where a person might come to the realization that I'm dead anyway. Yeah. I might as well make a break for it while I've still got the strength to deal with it.
If I'm going to die, let me die a few feet closer to home than I am right
exactly.
No, but seriously, like,
that's what a lot of drunk drivers use as their justification.
Happy to know. I do think it's an interesting movie, and I would recommend it. Like, I don't think it's a waste of your time to check it out, but I think it falls short of being amazing.
Right. Oh no, and like you said, there was that just the establishment of putting them up on the chairlift and like, now what are you going to do? Yeah. There was some other things that from a more critical aspect, like the tension between the girlfriend and the third wheel. Yeah. I didn't get that, and it didn't really come out. Like, it seemed to me, I took a writing class, and the guy described it as whack-a-mole. If you bring a point up somewhere, you have to whack it down later.
If you establish that there's a gun hanging over the fireplace, yes, sooner or later the gun will be used. Yes.
Yeah. Or the deal with the lift tickets. Yeah. Like, they didn't have lift tickets, and then they had to charm their way on. Maybe, and just from the discussion we've had now, maybe that was to justify them being on the lift and getting forgotten.
It was part of the...
Because because
cruel chain of events. Yeah,
kind of like the open water one, where
exactly. It's just
where
a
it was a
miscount
matter
on the
of
boat.
yeah, and so maybe that was meant to lend itself to that portion of their predicament.
Yeah,
but her charming their way onto the lift, I didn't really get, but maybe that was it.
There are no villains and there are no real monsters until the wolves show up in this movie. Again, I bet you if I did research on wolves, I would have a lot more questions to ask. Again, I take things at their at face value in this movie. But
right.
I think that it would be
Don't
really
know what's
tough to keep the whole movie in the chairlift. I think they were just trying to expand the world outside of the chairlift before they locked us into that. 'Cause
Fair enough. Yeah.
once we're locked into that, we are locked into that.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the characters does make the jump and does break his legs, and
that was creepy.
That
the broken legs, when they showed the broken legs,
how broken they were.
Yeah, that part was like, yeah, you know.
And you get the feeling like he thought he was so numb that he would he knew he would likely break his legs jumping down there, but at that point, he would be willing to die crawling closer to home.
Yeah,
he just wanted out of that chair, away from them, and just away from the situation.
And if it hadn't been, the legs notwithstanding, he might have had, because all he had to do was drag himself downhill. As much as that would be
horrible,
abject pain.
Yeah,
he might have made a go for it if it hadn't been
for them pesky wolves.
Those pesky wolves.
And this is just a plot point for me. And again, I don't know wolves. I completely buy them eating the wounded guy who can't get away and making a meal out of him.
That part of it I would kind of get, and that part of it I took as okay.
Yeah, I get it. No, for sure, they would prey upon the weak.
But it seems to me that after they fed later on, they wouldn't be chasing the other ones.
That's right where I was going with that. Once the wolves had their feast and got the easy meal, once our other two people are trying to get down the hill,
and they would keep going back to the guy that was already dead.
Absolutely.
Before they would go after the other ones,
because the other two weren't
it's already there.
They're not hurt. They're more than willing to defend themselves. Right, so
whatever that means, yeah. So that part was
yeah. And again, and who knows? I don't know how wolves react.
And the other thing about it was there was kind of it seemed to me that it was time for a different threat.
Yeah,
so there's trapped on a chairlift, can't jump. The height is too big. So there's trapped on the chairlift first. The first threat is the cold. The second threat then is the altitude or the height of the cable.
Psychological deterioration.
The next threat. Well, yeah, and they have their arguments. Or who was it? Someone froze to the bar. Or something
the female character fell asleep with her hands on the bar.
Yeah. So, but that kind of goes back to the cold threat, but in a new way.
Yeah.
The threat of the cable. You can't just the way it was presented, and then the threat of the wolves. The wolves coming back, I thought it was time for a new threat, and I don't know what that would be. I don't have a suggestion there.
Yeah.
But bringing them back to me seemed like a bit of a disappointment. It was time for something new.
Yeah. It's worth watching because not necessarily how satisfied I am with how everything wraps up neatly in the bowl, where I didn't have any questions or plot holes to pick, but it did light my imagination as far as what would I do if that happened to me. And I really do like the situational horrors that seem very, like it could happen to anybody. Just wrong place, wrong time. The chairlift stops at the wrong time, or the elevator stops at the wrong time, or you sleep and miss your subway.
Yeah.
And you wake up and you're in a fucking awful situation. And that's where I think this works. I asked a lot of questions, like I said, about the wire, about the wolves, about the chair, but I always accepted what I was presented with. I never cried bullshit when I was watching the movie.
For me, it was the cable.
Yeah.
Yeah, as I mentioned. And the hand frozen to the bar was grisly.
Yeah.
that was really well done.
Yeah. What I would say before we get into this review of Dead Snow is that when I'm looking at a movie, especially for the podcast, to say what I liked, what I didn't like, or does it work, is what is the movie, what are they trying to do, and how close to success do they come with doing it. This movie is absolutely ridiculous, and it knows that it's ridiculous. So the question is it fun enough that you can give it a pass and go with the craziness, or is it just too stupid to embrace? Most of the jury here is split, so I'm fascinated to hear what you have to say about Dead Snow.
Well, it's not that winter on its own, as we've alluded to or said outright a number of times, isn't horrifying enough. But then you got to throw in being stranded, and throw in zombies. But even that's not enough. They have to be Nazi zombies who are cold resilient, and they're fast. So it's kind of the stakes are ratcheted up a little bit, and the fact that, of course, going into these stories, generally a person doesn't believe it even when they're seeing it at first. Yeah, that changes significantly by the end. The premise was kind of fun, and it seemed a little how to put it, like it suffered a bit of a multiple personality disorder. That it started out with sort of the realism. Of course, it's horror genre, so it's not necessarily going to be realism the way Frozen was. No. And then it became a very almost campy kind of resolution, if you will.
It shifts gears repeatedly, suddenly, and abruptly.
Yes.
And that's okay for me. Like, I don't mind your movie sort of knocking me off guard a little bit here and there. I just want to know your heart's in the right place. For me, I think that their heart is in the right place. I kind of love this movie. But I am aware that this is a bunch of very familiar elements just put in a blender. What I like about it is that it's old and new. You sort of have the old pastiche of Nazi zombies trying to get back their Nazi gold from beyond the grave. I don't think that's going to, surprise anybody. And also sort of the sort of modern, Scream generation cast of very savvy, referential, kids. It's not quite as wink-wink as Scream as far as they're practically talking to the audience as it goes on there, but there's a little bit of that in the brew as well. I think what will make people like or hate the movie is if you're willing to adjust to the tone. Can you laugh at these people one scene and say that's a hilarious, little anecdote? And can you sort of enjoy how hammy the spooky guy who comes there to warn them is? Because that guy shows up in so many horror movies. You kids don't know what you got yourself into.
Exactly.
And you get the feeling that they milked that for everything that they could because they know that this guy is in every horror movie. He shows up, he gives them the information in the morning.
The creepy local.
Yeah, shows up, gives them the warning, and then usually he dies, right? That's just how it is. So,
which exactly, he's the one in the know.
Yeah.
What's he doing out in a frickin' tent?
He's there to give them the information and die.
Yes.
That's what his purpose is. Now, objectively, that's stupid and obvious. But this movie is about stupid and obvious. This is what I'm saying. It's a carnival ride. It's much less seriously toned than Frozen. This is like Guffaw, Halloween night, drink a beer, wow, that just happened movie. Yeah. And that's how you have to approach it. If you're going to watch this movie with a critical eye, if you want to find a way to poke holes in this movie, you'll find them,
Oh, and I do. I'm one of those people.
But I think that the movie's heart is in the right place. As much as it's like sick and gruesome and violent and nihilistic in some ways, it's also pretty fun. And that's enough for me to give it a recommend.
Now, I will say in the cold open,
right.
the nice use of Grieg. She's going through the forest, and it's the song playing over top of it.
Right.
And then that jump scare, it got me. It got me. And so that was the opening on that one. I really liked that part of it. That was really well crafted. But then we cut to the scene right after that.
A bunch of pretty kids.
The odd number of young people going off to have a fun weekend and talking stupid. And again, I recognize that it's not necessarily easy to do that. And sometimes it's just, well, we got to do this so we can get to the good stuff. Fair enough. But it almost seems like then maybe you don't need to do it. Because if you're establishing a cliche versus a character, you almost shouldn't bother. Almost. But I don't have a credible alternative to that, so I really can't. I'm not too critical of it.
Again, for me, it's just like, what are you trying to accomplish? And even within that box of what they're trying to accomplish, they did do a few little inversions that I thought worked. And like you said, the scares actually work. And in this ridiculous Nazi zombie movie, there's a few deaths that are felt.
Yes.
Where you're like, oh, that sucks, dude. So on one hand you've got that, and on the other hand you've got things that are just so obvious. Like you say, the clumsy exposition at the beginning, or how they painfully go out of the way to establish that one of the characters gets a little wiggy at the sight of blood. So
Yes.
of course there's going to be a scene where he's going to have to overcome this. Maybe you won't predict that he's going to sever his own arm, but
Right, right.
but there's nothing subtle about the setup, and there's nothing subtle about the payoff.
Technically,
Nothing surprised me in it, but I still was smiling while I was watching.
Technically, and this might seem like really petty, but I thought the subtitles went by too fast. I had a hard time, and of course, generally what happens is they choose white text
Yeah.
in a winter theme thing, and it
This is
doesn't
a
show.
pet peeve of mine, and I thank you for bringing it up.
Really?
That they do, either when the subtitles are too fast, that's a bit frustrating. If you're used to watching subtitled films, apparently you'll read them faster, but I'm a slow reader at the best of times.
I am too, apparently.
But I will put up with it, because I fucking hate watching movies that are dubbed.
Yes, yeah.
It's in widescreen. You put the subtitles on the black bar at the bottom of the screen.
Nice.
They're crystal clear. You can read them, and it just makes sense. Otherwise, it's like you say, they just use the white text, and sometimes they get washed out in the environment, especially in movies like this one.
Exactly.
Or they use the yellow block text with the sort of heavy borders to help clarify them, but they kind of pop out more, and it's almost like the movie becomes about the subtitles. So
When a subtitle pops up,
yeah.
even watching, and maybe you've done this, but even watching a regular English show, if there are subtitles, your eye is drawn to the text.
Yeah. But I recently did an episode called Subtitled Scares, and I was just all about that. If you have the option between watching it dubbed and watching it subtitled, always go for the subtitle, even if
I'm with you on
even
that
if they
one.
go by too fast, and even if the English is less than elegant.
I ended up having to back up or pause it or sometimes just to catch the dialogue as a result of it.
With the two subtitled movies that we're dealing with in this group, I also think they're familiar enough territory that you can catch up. You're not going to be too lost. There's not a lot that's going to be lost in the translation. One of them's
I'm
like...
pretty anal that way, though.
Yeah.
I don't want to miss...
But anyway, that rant over. But
Yeah.
that's how you should do subtitles, people. Black bar at the bottom of the screen. It's there, use it. It's been done since the mid-90s. Just do it. Anyway, what were we talking about? Yeah, Dead Snow.
Oh, then the quick cuts of putting the snow gear on kind of
Yeah.
reminded me of Hot Fuzz.
Yeah, or
Those-
Evil Dead.
Yeah.
Those quick
Or
cuts.
the guy, what have I got here? The same when the guy was building the torch to go through the snow cave.
Mm-hmm.
Like an idiot.
Yeah.
Why are you going to the snow cave?
Because we need another creepy
Yeah.
guy walking towards something spooky, and then something goes boo scene. I was not expecting the rather sudden creepy sex scene that we are treated to early in the movie, where the nerd gets a visitation while in the outhouse from the hottie. Are you remembering this?
Yes.
Because he's been played off as sort of like clearly the nerdy guy of the group who's just there to
He's kind of crude and...
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
That was a weird pair bonding.
he seems like he was the odd guy out, and he was just going to be, all sad and alone, smoking his joint alone while everybody was screwing in the room. But all of a sudden, she follows him to an outhouse in the middle of the winter. I mean, if there's a less romantic place to have sex, I don't know, but bless her heart for thinking of it. They say romance is dead, Robbie, but after watching those two people screwing in an outhouse in the dead of winter, I think that maybe they're wrong.
They need to see this movie.
True. It is inspiring.
Speaking though of the sex, like when the ranger guy gets it in the tent, it actually, the silhouette almost looked like there might be a sexual activity going on. I'm sure he's getting murdered by cold resistant snobbies.
Yeah.
but the silhouette's like, well, it could go either way. Like if you put a different audio track, you dubbed something underneath it.
Yeah.
It kind of could go either way.
I'm encouraging people to check out Dead Snow, but like I say, I think this sort of qualifies in sort of the almost guilty pleasure end of the spectrum. I mean, you watch it and enjoy it, and if you feel you need to cleanse the palate afterwards, go rent My Dinner with Andre or whatever.
Waiting for Godot.
Yeah, exactly. This movie is not a smart movie, and it is a fun movie, and for me, that's enough.
Well, and then some of the other cliches, like the close up on the carrot, when it's like, oh, is she gonna cut herself now? Yeah, of course she is.
It's a fun 90 minutes, though.
What was the guy's name? Erland? going into the very explicit and effects-heavy portion of the battle royale, I would have to say it was pretty gory when Erlen got his eyes pushed in.
Yeah.
And then his brains splashed out.
Yeah, there was...
And then fish hooked.
But there was no question. It wasn't like, oh, is he going to be okay? Is he going to pull out? No, he's dead. He's pretty conclusively, absolutely, horribly dead.
And as far as... and this is more of an inconsistency rather than it really bugged me. But sometimes the zombies are slow and sometimes they were fast.
Yeah.
That might be, again, a picky petty point, but you kind of got to pick a lane there.
Yeah.
You know, or what, are they just slow? They just got up. They haven't had their coffee yet. Like,
if you want to ask hard questions of this movie, it's not gonna pass muster. It really isn't. But if you want to have fun watching a Nazi zombie, and I do think that that's the goal. They're trying to have fun. As much as there are scary moments, and as much as there are actually pretty shocking, bloody moments that are kind of felt, the heart of this movie is this is goofy fun. They're making references to movies like Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness because they want to include themselves in that canon, and they're good enough filmmakers that I will welcome them into it.
That long-haired character, I don't remember his name, but he was hardcore. The one that stitched his own neck up,
yeah,
and then mounts that shotgun on the skidoo, or machine gun on the skidoo.
Yep.
There was a hardcore individual.
Go home or go hard. Just make sure all the change is out of your pockets.
Exactly. Martin, the guy when he cuts his arm off, and then he kind of gets that toothy Hummer from the zombie that pops out of the snow. Wow, this is a bad day.
Yeah.
Can't you give the guy like a couple of minutes to enjoy his triumph? He overcame his blood.
Yeah, his blood phobia.
And then, no, sorry.
Yeah.
We're going to bite your junk off.
Nice try, asshole.
Yeah.
This movie also has another accidental death in it, which I usually like in horror movies. There's, the situation creates such high stress that people make rash decisions or
are
react.
you getting into the moral that I took away from the movie? That's never tap a guy on the shoulder who's just gone berserk on a zombie with a hatchet.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not recommended.
That's the grim fairy tale description of that.
Especially in this movie, I found it shocking because, again, of its sort of goofiness. That moment was really ugly. And Hannah, that character, had gone through so much at that point to get back to them, and to finally get there, only to get...
Well, and that's another thing where it kind of, in a way, I don't know if it breaks the rules or the cliches of the genre, but just in so doing that, he's overcome something, there's been a success, and bang, it meant nothing. Or then, like you're saying, Hannah gets back, and but for naught.
2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yeah. What I didn't like was the clips under the menus.
The clips under the menu.
You know how when you've got the menu screen on the DVD?
Oh, okay, yeah.
It gave too much away.
A lot of spoilers there.
Yeah.
Right out
well,
of
they
the
do
gate.
it in trailers now, too.
Yeah.
Like in...
I think if you want to go the lessons, we're going a little off track here, but so be it.
Yeah.
If you want to go the lesson of like the difference between a good trailer and a bad trailer, I would invite you to look at the teaser trailer for the film Castaway, starring Tom Hanks.
Oh, okay.
And then watch the actual trailer. The teaser trailer, I think, is amazing. It shows you enough of the premise of the setup of the movie. Tom Hanks is left alone on an island, and he's stranded, and he needs to get off. And, it basically shows little pieces of the crash and him screaming on the beach, help, hello, hello, and showing how isolated he was. But the trailer for that movie is the entire movie, up to and including, spoilers, he gets rescued off of the island. My goodness.
All of that conflict and all of that tension just out the window.
Oh, it's okay, you guys. It'll be all right. He'll get off the island.
Yeah.
I mean, most people who pay their ticket know that inherently. It's a Robert Zemeckis joint. It's not going to end with Tom Cruise's skeleton bleached on the beach. But those two trailers...
You kind of know where that's going.
Yeah.
Right.
But those 2 trailers, I think, are just the illustration of how to do it and how not to do it. So still more snowboarders and still more subtitles for this next film, Cold Prey. Very different animal than Dead Snow in that I think this is definitely trying to be a scary, slasher suspense movie. Whereas, I didn't get a lot of laughs out of Cold Prey, where I was laughing. I was laughing a lot in Dead Snow, so they're different in that. But on a premise level, they're not entirely different. In this case, the snowboarding adventure gets sidelined with a broken leg. They have to, from a premise standpoint, find their way to this abandoned ski lodge where they make a point of splitting up and going into the creepiest corridors they can find to be stalked and killed one by one by a merciless killer. Is this familiar ground? Yes, it is. But the genre exists is like so many subgenres of horror, creature features, slashers, ghost movies. There's a lot of them. And every now and then, someone gets it right. Is this one of those? Where do you land on Cold Prey?
Okay. Well, where do we go? I have to say, and like we were talking about when you had a pause there, the opening shots of the scenery were really lovely, and they were maybe a touch on the overexposed side, but that really lent itself to the coldness and the isolation. And so I actually liked that part of it quite a bit.
More so than Dead Snow 2. I think it was isolating and creepy.
Yeah.
At the same time, like it's beautiful and creepy. It sort of walks that line.
And anyone who's walked out in the snow again knows that it can be very bright and blindingly so.
Yeah.
There is a snow blindness. It exists.
That's not just in the movies. That's a real thing that happens. Yes. Just the cold isolation. I really liked those establishing, probably second unit shots, and it really did lend itself to it, and it also I think lends itself well to a larger contrast that you can see for miles and everywhere, and then later on you're in this cramped space that you don't know very well, and someone else does, and I think that little contrast I think does carry through into it. It did for me anyway. And the isolation is that seeing for miles in all directions is beautiful, but it's no help to you in a dire situation.
It also, can be demoralizing when you're trying to hump out on a broken leg.
Exactly.
Like, we've got to get to that peak before we can get to the next one.
Yeah.
And we can see them both.
I think the getting to know you banter is relatively painless in this movie. There's the wild child who busts his leg, and you kind of know...
Talks about masturbating.
Yeah, he's going to be the one who's going to cause a problem if anybody is in the group. And I think that they do take steps to try and redeem that character, too.
They do, yeah.
So, I mean, there's an arc to him more so than you get in most of them. Typically, the character's an asshole, then all he gets is a deservedly painful death at some point in the movie.
It was a little bit like Texas Chainsaw Massacre meets Hot Dog.
Okay. Probably more Texas Chainsaw than Hot Dog, but I see where you're going with that.
I didn't actually have a lot of notes on that one. There was, as you said, the cliche banter, and the establishing of he's a real cut up, and then the other two couples are these two couples, and he is the literal fifth wheel. We need the plot point of someone has to be incapacitated in some way for them not to leave and have to hole up in this abandoned ski lodge or whatever it is overnight. There were the jump scares, as you said, doing what everyone kind of thinks they shouldn't in any of those situations is go off on your own. Yeah. Particularly after the first death.
Yeah.
I think at that point it's do some found weapons and get in a circle like Bison, and everyone faces out. Unless you're thinking that it's one of the people in the party, which is also a... But I don't think they really played on that potential at all.
No, there's confusion amongst the group, and people go missing for a while. They don't know exactly what's happened. We know what's happened. The reason I brought this up, actually, initially...
Right.
No. The reason I brought it up initially was just like, I think it walks the line that every sort of horror movie like this does, and that from a story standpoint, you kind of need to split up the group.
Yes.
In order to do the job that the movie wants you to do, which is sort of create these...
Unless you do it all like Descent, where it's all in pitch black.
Yeah.
And then someone could just be grabbed.
Yeah, and they don't know they're in a horror movie is basically what's happening. We're watching the movie, we have the scary movie, we see the atmosphere that they don't. That place didn't look like a ski lodge, right? It looked like a place where you shoot a horror movie. It was was like everything was accented to look scary. The production value was good, but to the point of actually bending reality. Would it really look like that? And the same thing is sort of like, would these people make those decisions? Is this a cabin in the woods scenario where they're just making dumb decisions because they have to? It's the ritual of the movie to split them up. Or can you objectively sort of remove yourself enough to say, well, I know it because I'm watching a horror movie, but if I was in this situation and I didn't know that I was in a horror movie, would I feel bad about sneaking down the hallway?
Pass me the cover?
Yeah, sneaking down the hall to get some alone time with my girlfriend, or see what I can steal from the place since it looks more or less abandoned. Maybe there's a bunch of booze or stuff like that. Like, it's weird the baggage that the viewer brings to a movie like this.
And that's a very good point, because the characters have not seen the cover of the movie that says "Cold Prey, prepare for your final descent," right?
Yeah.
And they didn't also have the benefit of seeing the quote here, "spectacularly scary."
Yeah.
Right.
For them, they're a bunch of kids going for a vacation. They're going snowboarding for the weekend.
They're not even going. It might not even be for the weekend.
Yeah.
Right. They might just want to do some backcountry hiking, and they couldn't afford to heli ski.
Yeah.
Right. And so they want to get into some more or less virgin snow without paying an arm and a leg.
So that's what I'm asking is, did you buy, or did you get past the reason that they were splitting up, or the constant isolation, or the bad decision making? Did you find yourself slapping your forehead and going bullshit, or did you go with it? Because for me, that's the pass or fail on whether or not you like this movie.
I think I did. I think I did forgive it, if you will,
Yeah.
or buy it, because I didn't write a bunch of notes saying like, oh, that is a complete, like in Dead Snow, the guy going into the cave, like,
Yeah.
That's kind of a bad idea,
It's
isn't
the
it?
best case scenario.
You don't find a Nazi snow zombie.
It's just a polar bear or something.
Yeah. Oh, that's a relief. But it's still a polar. I didn't make a note of that in this one, so I would have to say no, that didn't rattle me or jar me out of the suspension of disbelief.
There are things in this movie that you have seen before. There are character elements that you've seen before. We just talked about the accidental death of someone entering a door at the wrong time and being on the business end of some bad news. We've seen it all before. But the production value, and I think the performance is elevated in this case.
Yes.
I understand it's in a different language, but I think the emotion comes through. And I believe these kids were scared, and I believe that they were fighting for their lives. And I was cheering for them. And I took it on a much more serious note than I did, like I said, Dead Snow. I saw them as people and not sheep in that regard. So it worked in that the movie did what a slasher movie should do. It did all of those things while being another slasher movie, right?
The other thing though about the ending though is it shows that while the assailant, or the monster, if you will, is falling down that crevice, it shows some footage that led to his being the way he is, presumably, and it was completely. There's and again, I think it's a balancing act, and for me, they didn't quite meet it, of giving enough but not too much. And it just I didn't understand why he was on the ground, and I'm assuming those were his parents were kicking snow on him, and his dad looking stern, and his mom crying. I understood that was supposed to give some insight into, don't be mean to your kids or something like, and I don't think it was that sort of message. I think that was meant to be a little bit of a hint into the backstory, but
I think
it didn't make sense to me.
He was abandoned and left for dead by his parents, but he didn't die. He turned into this evil thing. Right?
They could have shown more of that, though.
Well, they saved that for the sequel, truth be told. There's a sequel to this
I haven't seen that.
There's a sequel to this movie, and they do go into it.
So that was just a hook for the next film.
Well, I don't know if they knew they were making a next film when they did this movie, but I think that probably the writer has had his fingers crossed that he wanted to franchise this, because if they can make 6 of these, he's going to have a much nicer house.
And is that part of the last jump just before the credits?
Yes, we wanted to talk about this. The last jump. This is a particularly random one in that everything is resolved. The killer's at the bottom of this pit, and she's the survivor girl is on her knees, shaken but alive.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden, random cut to scythe falling down or whatever it was into frame, and darkness and credits. People will argue that Carrie started it, but I have to believe that it's probably before this, where horror movies have a need to finish on a scare. It's the same sort of idea with your broad comedies, right? Always leave them laughing. So Carrie's hand has to pop out of the grave, and everybody jumps there, drops their popcorn.
See, but that one is linearly
it
consistent.
Works into the story. Jason Voorhees, as a child, jumps out of the lake, and everybody jumps because they thought the scare was over. The shark that everyone thought was dead pops out of the water right before the credits roll. It is almost like a copyright stamp on industry standard horror movie. Leave with a punch, right?
Yeah.
In this case, it is particularly guilty of just being random. Like, it's not...
So you're with me on that one, then?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I'm not defending that it's there. I'm telling you why it's there, because a lot of people believe that's how you end a movie. Again, I was telling you not to spoil movies outside of this list. I just spoiled several of them. But one of the classic things that... Nightmare on Elm Street, some people argue, classic horror movie. Okay, they didn't know how to end that movie. Really, the end of that movie doesn't make any sense in a lot of ways, but everything that came before it was so good that by the time the credits rolled, you were just sort of glad to have witnessed this fantasy horror movie.
Right.
It's a weird thing. Like they need like a really punchy line, or for some reason the victims just slumping over and putting their arms around each other and crying is not satisfactory. Most horror movies will have some kind of punch at the end, and that's why it's there.
And, maybe by that point, the director and the writer and everyone else is out, and the producer's looking at it and telling the editor, put this here because it fits the formula, like you're saying, and didn't give much thought to the story, which is, the constant battle between the creative aspect of the film industry and the business aspect of the film industry, where they're going, like, we can't just leave it a bunch of people huddled around crying or one shaking, that sort of thing. We've got to have that jump scare at the end.
I mean, I let it go. Like I said, it's standard. And a lot about this movie is industry standard. I think because of the elevated production values, and because, and I know this sounds dismissive, but people have a tendency to give a higher rating to films that are foreign. Somehow they're automatically just a little bit better because
they're very continental. You got to understand, Larry.
Well, it's true. There are a lot of like movies that get a good reputation overseas, especially horror movies. Won't completely blow me away. I mean, a lot, but just generally speaking, not even just in the horror movies, but for some reason, because they don't release every movie that was made in Japan and every movie that was made in Guatemala here, the fact that these are the ones we get to see, we give them a certain degree of prestige. In a way, this is just another slasher movie. It's a really well-made slasher movie. It's really well acted, and it's got some effectively done scenes, and it does everything a slasher movie is supposed to do well enough. But it's not particularly special in that it doesn't reinvent the wheel at all.
Right.
At all. Up to the point of having a copyright random scare right before the credits fall. Because that's what you do.
Yeah, that's the bit that just kind of was not in keeping with the rest of it, really.
Yeah.
Because I thought the acting was solid. The production values were pretty solid. I mean, you had your misgivings about the inside of the chalet. But
it looked good. It really looked good, and it helped to add to the atmosphere.
To me, I thought it was just in disrepair.
Yeah, there is something about these movies that is maybe because I'm used to horror movies with such low budgets that can't get away with it. A lot of these remakes of movies like the Amityville Horror, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, every single location just looks like it was made to shoot a horror movie in.
Right.
And I understand that there are abandoned farms that look every bit as creepy as that they are portrayed there, but there's something about the production that almost announces itself. But that's me looking for stuff to pick on. If you like slasher movies, by all means.
We had a class together, Intro to Modern Philosophy.
What? There's like 1 million people in that class. It's like Woodstock.
So, are you doing anything over the break?
I'm getting that laser eye surgery.
But your glasses look so good on you.
How would you know? I never wear them outside my dorm.
The National Weather Service has issued a winter storm warning for the entire eastern seaboard. Temperatures will plunge with a wind chill reaching 30 degrees below zero.
What the hell is this? Are we lost or something?
It's a shortcut.
Get back on the
Calm
highway.
down, relax.
Pull over.
Where do you want me to pull over? There's no
Pull down.
Hello? Any luck?
I can't get a signal.
What's wrong with you? What did I do?
You drove us here.
You think I intentionally arranged for us to get stranded? What kind of a psycho do you think I am?
All right, moving on. There are no skiers in this movie, and there's no subtitles for us to contend with. So we're already on a little bit firmer ground. This is a suspenseful little picture called Wind Chill. It's directed by Gregory Jacobs, and interestingly produced by, among other people, George Clooney and Steven Soderbergh. Emily Blunt and Ashton Holmes play the leads in this movie. And interestingly, they're not given names. It's the girl and the guy.
Right.
And the ghost figure that they end up encountering, spoilers, is played by an actor named Martin Donovan, who I've seen in a lot of things. And I kind of got weird mixed feelings about. He has this really sort of stony delivery that he kind of just always is Martin Donovan. I don't know if it's good or bad or indifferent, but
maybe he's been pigeonholed and those are the roles he gets because that's what he's known for.
For me, he always seems to have this vaguely bored vibe to him. I don't know, and maybe that's just me. This is my personal baggage I'm bringing to it. But I think in this case, it may work for him because the character that he's playing is kind of mysterious. A lot of these elements, though, are distracting. The fact that we don't get to know the characters' names sort of, I don't know, ends up kind of getting in the way.
I kind of like that because what it says to me is the writer sort of acknowledged it really doesn't matter.
It's Bob and Pauline. There, better?
Yeah.
Does that make the movie better
now
or
it's
worse?
Scary.
But I just don't understand it as a choice. And in a way, for me, it reminds me of how I wrote my first few plays, which were essentially conversations with myself. I was listening to a conversation in my head and transcribing it, essentially. And I would literally write it down. A says this, B says that. But it's something that either seems like a first-time writer thing or that you would do very consciously and for a reason.
See, I went the consciously and for a reason route.
And that's what I want to go with you with that, but I'm not sure if I fully understand what that reason is. If it's the boy and the girl, it's suggesting that all of these victims that have been accumulating over the years up until this point has been a boy and a girl. Maybe that's what they went for. But that note wasn't hit to the point where it caught my ear. I understood that they were going out of their way to not tell us their names, but again, I wasn't sure why. The other things that are going on, I think, actually kind of work. The Emily Blunt character starts to become increasingly suspicious of this guy.
I love that opening of the unknown guy who knows too much about her.
Exactly.
And how they kind of didn't get along, and then he was behaving sketchy, and so there was kind of a little bit of, and I thought well crafted, red herring in he's going to be and she's going to be trying, like some sort of weirdo, and she's going to be trying to get away from him, and then it turns out not to be the case. Yeah. Like, okay, there's a good twist.
But it's a great character thing, and I think a very accurate one, especially of young puppy love, stalker love, or whatever you want to call it. Because I think he does cross a privacy line and an engagement line. Like when he tricks her into he lies about where he lives to get her to just be in the car with him for this time. Yeah. He doesn't mean to rape her. He's not like all creepy or anything like that. But it's a movie thing. In a movie, it's romantic. In real life, you get arrested. Lloyd Dobler holding his ghetto blaster over the head, playing Peter Gabriel over and over again outside his girlfriend's window, is super romantic and say anything. In the real world, the cuffs are on Lloyd, and Lloyd is going to jail.
Turn that shit off. It's Sunday.
Exactly. And it's creepy.
Yeah.
And it's creepy. Legit creepy.
Like doing the grand gesture. Realistically, this guy has gone out of his way to try and learn about this girl and to find a way of meeting her on some intellectual level, and he's given her a free ride to wherever, which is way out of his way.
Absolutely.
Like if someone like if you were stranded and someone gave you a long ride, but it's the fact that he didn't tell her.
Yeah, and the only difference between him and your average sexual predator is the end game. The end game for him is that he wants a
fall in
girlfriend.
love. Yeah.
He wants a girlfriend. He's not trying to kill her or rape. He doesn't take her to some torture dungeon. But he's gone about it in about as creepy a way as possible. And
I can feel for that guy though, because I myself have not to that extent. I like to think
have been guilty of
but being awkward and not knowing quite what to do, but wanting to do something, and so I guess I sympathize with him in that respect. When you see the rest of the arc and that he's not going to take her to a dungeon and tie her up and put a video camera on her and webcast it, when you see that it's dude, you totally that totally looks stalkerish.
Yeah.
But it wasn't out of any sense of malice. It was about he just went about it the wrong way.
Your heart was in the right place, but she would still be completely right to kick you in the balls.
Yes, and leave you to freeze.
Anyway, the great thing about all this, we talk about it that much. This is all set up. This is all the tension.
Exactly. This was a
car.
really good setup, and it was a setup that looked like it was going somewhere it wasn't, and I did enjoy that part of it.
And that was enough. I don't think we needed the he-she business over and above that. I don't think.
But I don't think they needed names either.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It didn't it was still well portrayed. And if his name is George and her name is Iris, it doesn't really change anything that we
Georgette,
saw.
Georgina.
Anyway, once we get to the point where all of a sudden they decide to take the spooky shortcut and they get run off the road, and they're starting to get cold and they're starting to get a little bit more desperate.
Well, they get run off the road by that truck, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then the truck doesn't leave any tracks in the snow.
Correct.
And that's a nice device that something's not quite right here. And that's sort of the point where, again, he wasn't off the hook yet.
Yeah.
You know, maybe he's supernatural or something or other, but he wasn't quite off the hook at that point.
Yeah. He's also wounded when the car gets speeds off the road. He's hurt pretty badly, as it turns out. And I do think that there may be a little bit of selectivity in the screenplay as to how hurt he is in a given scene to the next. Because
that happens all the time.
If we play that card that, he's not a bad dude, he's legit, so he really is hurting.
He's just awkward and doesn't know what to do.
Yeah. But he says he's going to go try and make his way to the gas station or whatever it is. And then he leaves and comes back saying the gas station was closed, and there's no way he was gone long enough.
Yes.
The truth is, he staggered out into the woods and realized he didn't have the strength and wasn't able to go there. And no part of him believed the gas station would be open anyway. It was a 1 in 100 chance, right? So...
Because they really had just left it.
Yeah. Again, at this point, when things are getting creepy and supernatural, the subterfuge really needed to end. And it does eventually. Everything does come out in the car. Because he really needs to deflate this tension that's developing between them. Because as things get crazier, she's starting to wonder if she's been lured into this by this guy, or what is she going to have to deal with? Because it gets increasingly fucked. First, the invisible car that runs them off the road, and then the monk ghosts that are vomiting snakes.
Yes.
Right?
Which I didn't get quite the reason for them to be vomiting snakes. And then they get to that, she finds that burnt out, was it an old...
Monastery.
Yeah. Right, because they'd be monks.
Yeah. What's happening here is that we are being shown elements of the history, the backstory of this ghost road, or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
But because we don't know the history yet, we don't know how the pieces fit. We don't know where the monks fit.
I don't think we ever really do.
Well, we find out as things play out that there's a police officer that had used this stretch of road as his personal hunting ground. And he was caught when a group of someone escaped.
He lit fire to the monastery.
Correct.
Yes,
someone escaped, the monks helped them, and that led presumably to the police officer being found out for what he was, but not before he burned down the monastery.
Right.
A lot of death has happened on the road, so it's become this cursed place. And apparently this time of year, it almost like lures these people in like a trap, so that these old ghosts can play out this old nightmare. And this police officer can attempt to claim a few more victims. What I like about this screenplay is I think that the guy watched a lot of horror movies. He's got the creepy stalker element well explored there. What's this guy up to? And they've gone out of their way to make us think he's a red herring, so he's probably not a red herring. But then there's the other step, is that they run off the road and all this fucked up shit starts happening. Then you start thinking, did they die in the crash? Is that the reason that they're seeing all this and that? Another completely adequate interpretation until the cards are shown, right?
Yep.
So I think that there's actually quite a bit going on in the screenplay.
Usually, again, there's kind of the local the local people who know what's going on. Why did the people from the gas station send them down the creepy haunted road at night in a snowstorm?
Presumably, if they're locals too, they know that people tend to wash up dead in that road.
Right.
Right.
This is one of those little. But that for me, that was a small one because this is all in retrospect. At the time, I was still focused on this other sort of red herring villain.
And again, it's something that you'd watch again when you see it the second time. You'd sort of pay closer attention to.
Right.
It reminds me of An American Werewolf in London. The backpackers at the beginning of that are basically sent out into the moors where the locals know for a fact there is a werewolf, and they shoo them out the door. They don't let them stay in the bar, and then they turn around and go and rescue them. But the question remains: why did they do that? Exactly. So if that's a flaw in the screenplay, I guess it's something that shares with
It'd be one thing if you sent them out knowing and you were offering up a sacrifice to keep your own village safe.
Right.
That'd be one thing. Yeah. But to send them out and then go save them, that one kind of stuck. Then the other thing that the one critique, though, the biggest critique I think I had of it is at the end, where the cop is on fire and he freezes the tow truck driver. Mm-hmm. That's I mean, the cop is passed on by this point, right?
He was been a ghost this whole time, is my understanding.
So none of the ghosts actually were able to do anything to them, except somehow at the very end, this one ghost managed to be corporeal and capable, or at least able of affecting things in the corporeal world.
Yeah.
And that was again one of the that's the part for me that was the too far.
I'm just gonna say this is an element, as a rule, I despise in horror movies. When they kill a character off and then the character's ghost shows up to save the day, it is never not cheesy. It's never not cheesy. You don't want to use a device employed by Friday the 13th Part 7. Okay? In a movie that wasn't otherwise lazy, it was a lazy and expected event. The creepy stalker kid was so wounded in the car accident that he ended up actually slowly dying over the course of the night.
Right.
And in spite of the fact that he slowly died over the night and was not trusted by this woman pretty much for the whole time, his ghost shows up to save her at the end of the film.
Because it was true love after all.
And he really
it was almost a romantic ending, hey?
Creepier still, it suggests to me he continues to stalk her in the afterlife.
Yeah.
But
now she really can't get rid of him.
Now she's fucked, right? The truth is, though, that I liked the movie enough before that happened that I'm going to give it a pass. And I will still say, like, that it's a worthy enough watch.
Well, I think, like I said, until the going too far aspect of it.
Yeah.
The rest of it was a really nice build up, and the red herring, really enjoyed that.
And some good boo moments too. Like
yes,
it works enough. Like the characters are likable and they work. The scares are set up well and they pay off well. The few minutes before the credits finally roll, it gets a little bit obvious. I like the movie enough, but I acknowledge it has flaws, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well,
there's enough good in this, like I said. It's just those little tangents of the screenplay that, because so much of it is so good, I end up being harder on the he-she thing and the ghost saves the day thing, because
when something is very well executed to a point and then just completely blows out at the end, it's like, you bastards, what happened to this wonderful little story you were creating? And
I still think it's good enough to get a passing grade.
Yeah.
What's the most frustrating is when you have a movie with a good premise, a good cast, and you can see a fantastic movie there,
executed.
But it's just not happening. Those are the most infuriating movies to watch.
Do you remember the movie where there was kind of a creature... It was sort of a possession type movie, and there's that one point where the girl's mom looks over her shoulder, and it looks like sort of a dinosaur Darth Maul thing is over her shoulder.
Oh, Insidious.
Yes. Yeah, see, that one had a sort of a paranormal activity vibe to it that, you weren't really sure. And then for me, the point too far was when the dad went to the other side, and you got to see it. If there are ghosts, if there are these things, then they're just part of the natural world. They're not supernatural.
Correct.
But... when you see, and especially visually, when you see, there's a bunch of goopy gel, and then there's a monster sticks its face out of the closet and that sort of thing. Like some stories just can't be made into a visual catch-22.
Yeah.
Really reasonably can't made into a good movie, I don't think.
They sure tried hell, but...
I know. And there were lots of really good elements to it, but there's something that the visual medium can't do that a written story can.
Yeah.
And there's sometimes, like I said, there's that moment too far for me in some movies. Insidious is one of them.
Yeah.
When he went into the other realm, and it's just like, oh, he's walking around.
I was with
and
it that far, and then
yeah, and I think that might have been it for you with the was it when the boyfriend came back, or when the tow truck driver froze
it wasn't
or the cop froze the
when
tow
the
truck
cop like that seemed to be his mode. Like they were finding people frozen solid. Like that had at least been established. That didn't bother
frozen
me.
solid in winter.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that way it wouldn't seem as a mysterious death. Their car broke down and they froze, right? But what's really happened is they were killed by this evil ghost. But right.
So were all the murders then, do you think, of the cop after he died, or he was?
I think that we were reliving the night that he was caught, which was he was going over that over and over and over again. But this was happening this time of year, and these couples kind of got caught up into it. I mean,
that part of it's kind of consistent in terms of ghost lore and ghost stories. That quite often the I'm doing finger quotes.
Yeah.
Real ghost stories.
Correct.
Are someone or some disembodied mentality reliving
the last few moments
before expiring, as opposed to, oh, I'm dead, now I'm free.
Yeah.
You know, now I can do all the shit I wanted to.
Yeah.
And really there'd be a lot of male ghosts around sorority houses and watching people shower. That'd be it.
Yeah.
You know.
Like I say, are there some problems with the screenplay? Yes, but not enough to sink the ship.
No, not at all. I thought the screenplay started out really strong.
Copy that.
Board the windows. Try to hide. They're coming.
They? Who are they?
They're like vampires, you know?
Vampires don't exist, Jake.
That cold ain't the weather. That's death approaching.
We're tearing through everyone's home.
We can last the month.
30 Days of Night is based off of a comic book or a series of graphic novels. And I think from a story standpoint, both the movie and the comic, I mean, they don't do too much different with the vampires sort of creature, you know. They're bloodsuckers, they want to feast on our blood, we're cattle to them. The only thing that the approach is different is that they decide to siege a town in Alaska, which has, as the title would suggest, a full month without sunlight, so they can day and night be just feeding off this entire town and then write it off as some kind of natural disaster. Such is the basic premise for 30 Days of Night. But I think that the strength of it maybe isn't necessarily the concept or the screenplay, but much like the book, the visual presentation of the world.
Really stunning. Really stunning.
And I think that's where most of the points are going to be scored for 30 Days of Night. But I'm willing to hear a second opinion. So where do you land on it?
First of all, I've griped about opening bits before and establishing of characters, but this one it seemed like there was a reason for it. Whether it was a good reason or a bad reason is up to the individual viewer, but there was a reason for it beyond a bunch of people in a car going away on a vacation for the weekend. Mm-hmm. And there were differences in characters, and there was backstory. I guess what I would call the leads, the cop and his wife.
Melissa George and Josh Hartnett.
Thank you.
The two. They're the sheriffs of this little Alaskan town, and they obviously were a couple and are on the outs. No, she was supposed to leave, you're right, and Dan missed her last flight out and is now trapped in this town for the next month with her ex, and not happy about it.
Yes.
And then shit starts to happen.
Yeah.
Again, the dynamic of the couple that isn't doing well, that grows closer over a crisis, is something that we have seen a lot. And the character that Ben Foster plays, who shows up in town to tell him that Death is a coming.
He was like, what's his name? Tom Waits in one of the vampire
he's a Renfield sort of figure.
Renfield, that's the
he's
character.
a familiar or whatever you want to call them. But as far as that character showing up to warn them of what's coming, and the heavy-handedness with which that's given, it's a juicy portrayal that Ben Foster gives, and he sells it as best he can. But you can't hide the fact that this is a scene that we have seen again many times before.
Well, like you had said to me at one point, it's not that there are any really new stories under the sun. It's about how you get there.
Yeah.
And
what are you trying to accomplish in your movie?
Yeah.
And I think what they're trying to do here is sort of have like a vampire movie with teeth. Ironically, the director here went on to direct, I believe, one or maybe even a couple of the Twilight movies, which is one of the PGI's vampires are sad and romantic things that Anne Rice started, and that I tends to give me an upset stomach as a rule. This is
you didn't like the Anne Rice? You didn't like the Vampire Chronicle?
I'm okay with the Interview with the Vampire, the movie. I read the first 2 books, was okay with it, but I have a hard time feeling sorry for them because they feed on people. And I like scary vampires. I don't like mopey, everything's terrible, I gotta go fucking cry and play in a rock band. I don't think they're for me, I don't think those books are for me. And I think that they're almost the romanticizing of vampires, which is very popular these days.
Yes.
Is fine. I mean, you can have variants: fast zombies, slow zombies.
Vampires,
scary vampires or lame vampires.
The way they're being portrayed today, vampires are celebrities.
Yeah,
they're cool. They're aloof. They're pretty. They don't age. They really personify what we all look to in the entertainment industry, is that this preservation of youth and coolness.
Yeah. But going on to just sort of the, I think, weakening of the vampire mythos, which is very loudly recognized, whereas, there's the beautiful girl who has to choose between a vampire boyfriend and a werewolf boyfriend, or
is the way the question was characterized to me, necrophilia or bestiality.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not even just the Twilight franchise, which is, I think, the most guilty of it. It's just, there's a whole subset of pictures that romanticize vampires. And they make a lot of money doing it. I'm just saying, that's not my bag. I like that these vampires are nasty.
They're wolves.
And violent.
They're wolves and we're
animalistic.
sheep.
Yeah. And really scary and fast, and the way that they deal with, the killing these people.
Another thing I really liked about them was that there was a sense of, how to put it, an old world culture. That there was...
they had their own language, they had their own chain of command.
Their own language is cool. They had a chain of command. They had some sort of hierarchy. And they had, whatever fashion sense, it had an old world feel to it, because of course they would exist for a long time.
Yeah.
And so they existed in the modern world, but started much earlier or right through it. And maybe they just, for them, when you're immortal, like some people will dress in the 80s and always in the 80s. Yeah. Well, maybe these guys will always dress medieval because that was the good time.
Yeah.
That's when we looked really good. And you know what? Medieval will come into fashion again in another 2,000 years.
Yeah.
But they're not going to throw that stuff out of the closet. They're not going to send it to Goodwill.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. I do like the idea that they're not. I think the thing that you're talking about that's not for you is the humanization of an apex predator that uses humans as its prey.
Yeah.
They wouldn't anthropomorphize us. They wouldn't, right? That's what makes them satisfying, because they're just your food.
Yeah. Or they would be crazy to, think of us as anything more than food, because they would go mad, or they would have to...
Well, then they all become vegan, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And get even more pale.
Yeah. And more lame. Oh, I'm a vampire, but I just, eat raw steak.
Does this sweater make me look fat?
Yeah, exactly.
Really?
I'm so bored and unhappy. Oh.
It's like a stake in my heart.
Yeah, exactly.
Dude. So, but one thing, going to sort of a technical thing, or maybe more of a plot thing, the first place they attacked, the communications tower?
I think it's the electrical point, the generator for the town. I think they had all those gas canisters.
But I thought they also had RF, microwave. It was also a microwave tower.
Okay, right.
So they took that out first, and maybe that's what that Renfield character does. Is he goes ahead and susses out the area.
And they'd obviously made preparations. All the cell phones being stolen and destroyed. All of the dogs being killed, so they couldn't even dog sled out.
Was that why, or is it because the dogs are an early warning?
Or they would warn them they were coming. Either or. It was just anything that they any advantage that they might have been able to edge up was already being chipped away even before the sun went down for the final time.
Right.
And that's a lot of what they're seeding into the first third of the movie when we're getting to know our characters.
And I like that again because it didn't just happen all of a sudden that you knew something was going on, but you didn't see them right away.
Yeah.
And the first time you saw them, what a beautiful series of shots. That overhead, that moving overhead over the town.
Yeah.
When they're running out, because first of all, like if you've ever been up high and looked down on people walking, we look really funny.
Yeah.
When we're walking, because basically we're falling. It's a controlled fall. You lean forward and take a step. And it looks really bizarre. And that whole thing, and just the madness of it, the mayhem and the chaos, I've got a real appreciation for whoever choreographed that whole thing. And the move, and then there's this, and some people get away and some don't because a thing jumps out of the alley on them. That overhead shot, I just love it.
And that whole melee sequence, that's the payoff for the first 25 or so minutes of the movie, which, some people would argue, oh, come on, get to the blood and guts, you guys. I'm more patient than some, but once that worm turns, it turns huge. Mm-hmm. I think probably 2/3 of the town is wiped off the board right away, and then it becomes this siege. Then it comes them moving from house to house and ousting the lone survivors or the people who are starting to slowly band together.
And then there was the Mr. Cooper.
Yeah, of course. But there is that siege element to it, where this is kind of taking the zombie element the vampire element and zombifying it, because that's basically what it turns into. They're being sieged. There's no relief, so they're boarding themselves up into whatever obscure corner and trying to wait this out.
And a creepy scene when they send that one kid out
as bait.
Yeah. That was well affected, and again, like I said, like there's the mindless monster, and then there's a crafty one that has had way more centuries than we have to develop their stratagems and to get good at mining the blood ore of a town, right?
Danny Houston plays sort of the big bad, so the head of the invading vampire posse, or whatever you want to call the gang of vampires that's eating this town. I would say he usually plays a lot more sort of straight lawyer type roles, and he kind of surprised me how much he kind of brought the evil and the he was fairly intimidating.
Yeah. There was the bit that sort of gave to me, and there was what I liked was, like I said possibly previously, there was a hint of the backstory, but not too much. Mm-hmm. And the sense that they had... I guess there would be... I'm okay with being sort of... There being analogs between the vampires and the humans, as long as they're not just immortal humans. And there was the sense of they had their culture, they had their own policies. For example, when the one girl got injured... the one vampire girl got injured, and he says, what is it? What is broken must be destroyed, or something like that.
If they're damaged to a certain degree, they're just not good enough anymore.
Yeah, so out you go. And again, that was a hint at there being a deeper, more complex, or more defined culture. But it didn't go on and on and on about it. Yeah. And I liked those sorts of little bits where there would be... not necessarily spirituality or religion to them, but there is a moral code, however brutal and inhuman it might be, and appropriately inhuman because they're not.
It's actually kind of curiously unattended, the whole sort of religious aspect of it. I mean, whether or not they believed in vampires that the day before, when the vampires showed up and started killing people, they probably did, and I don't think much thought to things like crucifixes or preaching or anything like that is really even...
They were just, I mean, as far as that goes, there's kind of a, like I was saying before about supernatural versus natural, these are beings that exist, obviously, by virtue of the fact that they exist, and I'm not going to assume that there are some spiritual rules that govern them.
Right.
I'm just gonna hide out,
Yeah.
and hopefully the whole sunshine thing is true.
Yeah.
Which was more or less it.
I think that a flaw to this, and maybe it's a flaw in the book, but I think it's one of those things that's more satisfying in comic form than in film. And this is something you run into a lot when you adapt movies. I think that Superman in the blue tights works fine on the page, but seeing the blue tights is weird.
That's why X-Men got away from the...
They made conscious decision to do that, and I think it's a wise one. Kick-Ass, the same sort of idea. The idea of a little girl who's a professional assassin works in the panels of a comic book. But when you see this sweet little girl dealing all this death, it's hard to know how to take it and how much fun we're having, you know. But again, I think that in the crazy world of a comic book, that stuff is more agreeable. Like I say with the tights and the thing that really worked in the comic book that doesn't in the movie, even though it's shockingly faithful, I think is the final confrontation between Ivan and the head vampire. Ivan's been bitten, or he injects himself with vampire blood to give himself strength.
Yeah.
They have a big confrontation, and right as the fight's about to start, basically, he drives his fist basically right through the creature's face, obliterates it. There's been all this setup for this being the big bad, so you're expecting a fight. And I kind of understand sort of the choices of sort of, we didn't see that coming. But I gotta say, well, seeing that large, painted illustration in the comic book, it seemed like a big climactic moment. And in the movie, it felt anticlimactic. The ending of this, the dispatchment of the big bad, like I said, didn't feel like a climax. It felt like an anticlimax. And I kept on waiting for the big moment and it ended up, I guess, being, the lighting of the fires and the sun finally coming up on the last day.
And was it that...
Really, the movie peaked for me on the initial attack on the town. Like you were talking about that sequence.
That was really... Well, and they were kind of doomed by their own success in a way, because that was really, for me as well, that was really an incredible series of visuals.
That scene and a scene a little bit before, or just before it happens actually, where a vampire runs down a moving car. They speed away and they figure, oh, we're away, and then they realize, no, that fucking thing is chasing them, and no, all of a sudden it's on the car and still trying to get at them. Again, they made vampires scary, and thank you
yes.
for that.
Yes.
So
like, oh, another one got away. I'm like, yeah, I can catch this. I'm supernatural.
Yeah. But I do think it's a problem if your movie peaks 40 minutes into it, and I think that might have happened here. I still think, again, it's a good movie. I think I got to acknowledge it's got some problems.
Ugliest sin out here. It's pure white nothingness.
Where's my welcoming party?
How you doing?
We need to talk, you and me. We don't need the others.
I'm not gonna sign something just because you need me to.
That's the wrong answer.
The world we grew up in is changed forever. There is no way home.
Okay, last but not least, I don't think, is Larry Fessenden's The Last Winter. He's credited here, director, editor, and producer, and I believe co-writer of this film. So his hands are all over it. He also plays a very, very small role in the movie. I've talked about him before, on top of having his own sort of career of directing a lot of solid horror movies, he tends to show up in little acting roles a lot of time. He often will do one scene roles where he dies. It happens again and again in the Session 9 and then the Brave One and You're Next. He's like in it for a scene and then he's dead type of guy. But he's one of those people, sometimes people will recognize him without recognizing him. We're like, that guy, I've seen that guy before. Before this, he'd written and directed a film called Habit, which is a sort of vampire movie, and another one called Wendigo, exploring, not unsurprisingly, the Wendigo mythos. And his movies are very atmospheric. He's definitely a horror filmmaker, but he is not, this isn't Friday the 13th. This isn't Nightmare on Elm Street. He wants to kind of work your nerves. He's into the atmospheric, spook you out, get under your skin.
I would go with that assessment.
Yeah.
Yes, this was certainly within the scope of what you just said.
Yeah, that's what he's going for. But I think that I would prepare people going into this. This isn't a carnival ride funhouse where there's a ghost jumping out of every corner, or where there's a lot of easy, obvious answers. Like, this is a movie that is as much felt as well. It's going for sort of the visceral experience. And as far as giving that idea of isolation and sort of starting with the camaraderie that is bred in all these people that live in this sort of harsh environment in these little houses, and sort of breaking that down to sort of the other extreme of when the cabin fever, I guess they call it, when people spend too much time together. And this is also augmented by the fact that it's an oil company, and they're going to do some drilling, and they're up in the frozen tundra, and
far north somewhere.
They're up north somewhere, and things are starting to melt, and weird shit is starting to happen.
You were wondering if it was like maybe eco horror. Or
well,
something like
that's the idea. I think is that something is thawed out in the melt, and is being something that used to be here, but it wasn't for a long time, is back. And either that, or you can interpret it, depending on how far you want to go down this trail, as finally the Earth is trying to fight back against this horrible virus that is humanity, which is doing all these terrible things. However you want to interpret the movie. That's one of the great things and valuable things about, I think, most, if not all, of Larry Fesseden's work, is that you can look at it from a supernatural perspective, or you could interpret it another one. I think in this one, the dots are pretty connected conclusively that there was some spooky stuff happening. But
that's credible.
But I think it's the journey here, and really good cast. Kevin Corrigan's in here. Connie Nelson, who's been rising for her work in Friday Night Lights and American Horror Story and things like this. Ron Perlman, Hellboy himself, is sort of the big man in charge. And like I say, James LaGrosse is this sort of more environmentalist guy who's come here to assess damage, and it seems increasingly obvious that he wants to stop the drilling.
And he's not very welcome as a result.
No,
certainly not by the Ron Perlman character.
No. And most people just want to get the job done and go home, do their however many months and get home. This is a paycheck job for them. But things start going awry.
I thought there were those great whiteout scenes at the beginning, and where there was the sky was white, the ground was white, and there was no horizon. Again, in terms of the disorientation of an isolated environment, captured that really well. And again, that was the sort of thing. It's a visual medium, and I liked the authenticity of the raccoony kind of snow faces, or the reverse raccoon.
Yeah.
Because you've got the glasses on, and for the rest of it, the sun is bouncing off the snow into their face. I liked the ruddy complexions. I don't know if that was necessarily by choice or a budget issue, or if
the movie definitely felt authentic. I didn't believe
there's a real authenticity to that, and that I really enjoy that, and it made it as much as you can make this type of story real, that went a long way towards it. The visuals are right there, and they were real looking people. And they had real agendas, like you mentioned, the sort of more environmentally oriented individual shows up, and then there's real tension between those people. I did enjoy that setup. That was not the cute college kids going on a weekend vacation that runs amok.
We don't see these people all the time, and these people are fairly interesting, and we understand everybody's sort of motivation.
Characters were pretty well developed, and they were individuals without being so comically diametrically opposed that they were unbelievable. There was a shared common sort of humanity to them, with varying agendas, and I found a bit of a realism to that drew me in, because that's the sort of thing I think is for me most effective, is supernatural things happening to natural people, right? Or good things happen, or bad things happening to good people, right?
Everybody has their own biases in this. Ron Perlman's character is not going to believe that anything crazy is going on, because it's all people go wiggy in the north, and this guy's looking for an excuse to shut us down, and he's just going to exploit this tragedy. Like, he's not. He is the Cooper figure, Ron Perlman, but it is somewhat motivated, and he's not a complete irredeemable prick. He makes a lot of bad calls, and that is his right because he's in charge.
His calls aren't based on irrationality, though. They're based on a very rational, if not entirely supportable profit motive.
Yeah.
It's pretty straight ahead. Like there's nothing really difficult about that.
And he's honest about it. You know?
Yeah.
He's not necessarily altruistic in any respect in that way.
Not hardly critical about it.
Yeah. I also get a feeling with the James LeGros character is like he wants to shut this place down, and he's right to shut this place down. But he was going to shut this place down. Like
he came there.
He came there to shut it down. As every way as the Ron Perlman character had his own biases, so does the James LeGros. So they both have a part to play in the progressive chaffing that comes between them. And because, again, we keep on going back to Night of the Living Dead analogies, is that in this situation they need to work together, and they can't. They fail utterly at that. It works in sort of a psychological, sociological sort
It's a
of
good
element.
slow burn.
I also want to give it big points because it's in that sort of comfortable crowd of spooky movies like Session 9 or The Shining, because it's scary before the scary stuff
before you
starts
see
to happen.
anything.
The movie is already creepy and settling into you
Yeah.
before anything really scary happens. Just the shot, the faraway shot of that lone shack in the middle of fucking nowhere is disturbing. There's something inherently disturbing about it. The shrill call of that crow flapping inside that room, it's unnerving and scary. And then, the evil in it, or the enemy in it, remains kind of mysterious, almost intangible for more or less the entire movie.
I think. You think it becomes tangible at any point?
Well, I think there's a couple times where we actually might have got a legit glimpse of it. But again...
Glimpse, yes, glimpse. But it's never explained, like you were saying. Is it the earth striking back?
Yeah.
Or is it dead spirits of some kind? Or is it like... It was
or is
really
it
left...
the hallucinations of a man who is very likely dying? Because you can also interpret that when we're seeing it.
Well, until...
Until the very end of the movie.
Well, not until the very end. There was that videotape that the first guy that died
left behind, right?
The found tape kind of thing,
right?
And that thing that came up behind him,
right,
was seen to, and very ethereal, and maybe it was just snow, but they all saw it.
Yeah.
So the group hallucination at that point
is a hard sell.
Kind of goes out the window. Yeah. So it seems like there's plus a hallucination wouldn't have left that guy dead.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe he froze to death.
He froze to death. He was out in the middle of...
Yeah, and then we all had a group hallucination, so let's get back to drilling, you know?
Yeah, well...
And I gotta say, that shot, that scene of that thing coming up over his shoulder, that was probably one of the spookiest things out of all 6 movies that I saw. Mm-hmm. That was because it was kind of there and gone.
And Ron Perlman saw it, clearly. And you know why we know he saw it? Because he destroyed the tape as soon as it was over. Right? Because he didn't want to have
supernatural business interfering with my...
If he destroyed it and never saw it again, he can tell himself he was seeing things and continue on his sort of path, right?
Well, yeah. Well,
if he has to sit down and wrestle with this and legitimately talk about it, he's not going to have a lot of stable ground. I'm hoping that people listening have seen the film, but what we're actually making reference to is that this kid, who is the newbie of the group and the son of a close friend of Ron Perlman, starts going crazy, and he wanders out of their sort of little survival area, stark naked in the middle of the night, and just basically walks to his death as far as they know until they find that video. So he's also personally invested because he's got to make the phone call to this guy who... You know, originally he set up his son with a sweet summer job, and now he's got to call a guy and tell him his son went crazy and is dead.
Yeah,
there's nothing fun about that.
There was an irresponsible paucity of gratuitous nudity in the movie. Usually these sorts of things have a little more nudity, and I thought that was really dreadful of them not to really leverage that.
No fair.
Yeah, they spent more time on the story
than on random acts of nudity.
Yeah, that was...
This isn't that. Like I said, this movie is not about tits and gore. If you're looking for tits and gore, I will escort you to other films.
No, but I did like the way things weren't explained very well, and there are lots of movies and lots of stories where it could be this or it could be that, and it's never explained. But as the audience or the reader, it is important that I have a sense that it is definitely one or the other.
Yeah.
And I think if the author or screenwriter doesn't, him or herself doesn't know what the rules of the world are, I do think it comes out in the writing, and is somehow less satisfying. And I don't need it explained to me that it's definitively this or definitively that. But I have to know that it is either one or the other.
Yeah.
But if someone just does it because they're copping out, I think that does come through in the writing, and I think that's horribly dissatisfying. And I think an audience, to a large extent, senses it. You know, we kind of get the sense that there are rules to the universe, but we don't necessarily understand them all the time. But we like to think that there are rules. And so when you're creating this fantasy world, this fictional world, we have to think there are rules even if we don't understand them, even if we don't get them. And if that incompleteness is there, I think it comes through in the writing and the execution, and we sense it. In this one, I think for me it was a bit too vague for me to make that delineation, and so it was a little less satisfying as a result.
I think that it's sort of pass or fail on how you feel about the very ending. Before I get to that, though, just to spoil the very, very end of the movie, I wanted to talk about another moment in the movie that has always stuck with me. There's a scene where...
When Dawn runs amok?
There's a scene where the two of them are trying to get to a settlement. The James LeGros character and Ron Perlman character are trying to get to a place. And Ron Perlman has fallen through the ice and has been rescued by James LeGros, but is too cold to go on. And James LeGros has got to get over this one more hill to get to where there's more people and get help. And he's almost there when he finally gets taken by this force, by whatever it is. He's picked up and he is pushed away, and he's being carried far away. He's soaking wet, and as he sees the lights of this town going farther away, he knows he is dead. And he flashes to himself as a kid, running through the snow, up the front steps, and going through the front door of his house. He just has this little flash before he is let go and abandoned to freeze to death in the middle of nowhere. And there was something so weirdly perfect about that for me, like, from that character's standpoint, knowing that he was dead and that he goes to this different but much better winter landscape from his past. In that moment, I remember having the thought that this was a weirdly, and it's not Canadian-made, ironically, but it felt like it was almost a quintessentially Canadian, like, horror moment. Because we can all, at least I have memories of being a little kid and enjoying the outside winter wonderland and running inside and, your nose full of snot and the light being all fucked up and weird when you go in the house. And the safe haven of being back home after having a fun adventure outside. And that he sort of takes himself to that place in order to escape the reality of his final moments, I thought was really, really strong. But to go to the end of the movie, and I think this is where you get the pass or fail, and you have to ask, was there a plaster man to this? Does Larry Fessenden know what's going on, like you were talking about before?
I think he does, and like I said,
I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. It
was even so. That's what I mean. It was. I like, as I said, I do enjoy when it's not spoon fed to me. I don't like it like the. Okay, I'm not going to go into specific examples, but I don't like it when it's spoon-fed and this is what you're supposed to think.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you the context and hopefully lead you down the garden trail, but I'm going to leave you enough leeway that maybe you won't see what I see when I looked at this. For example, if I read a book and I go to you, Larry, I think is a good book, please read it, as opposed to I tell you what I took away from it.
Because that will change how I read it, likely.
Yeah, and so I do appreciate the sort of entertainment genre that does that says, here's how here was my experience, what do you think of it, and leave me the room to think about it.
Yeah.
Again, I think this one left it a little too much open to interpretation. I suspect, I'm leaning towards he had the rules of the universe that he'd created to build this story.
We have one survivor, the Connie Nelson character, who wakes up at some sort of emergency place, a police precinct or hospital or something. And she wakes up and you believe she's safe. And then you realize that this madness, this plague of supernatural evil, madness, and
whatever it is.
And I think there's a variety to the things that are thawing out of the eye. That's sort of how I choose them. But whatever it is, what they witnessed on that remote site, where they were just at ground zero to a wave of what I assume will be infecting the rest of the world. Like I say, the planet Earth is going to reject the human species like a bad organ at this point. Some of the people go mad, and some of the people get carried away by these weird antelope-looking ghost creatures.
Right.
And how those two things reconcile themselves, I won't say that I completely understand. But what I get enough is that whatever thawed in the ice is going to kill all of us. And that's what's clearly established in the last moments. The movie clearly doesn't have the budget to explore a huge global apocalypse, and Larry Fessenden isn't interested in that. He doesn't want to see
He doesn't need to be.
He doesn't want The Last Winter 2. He doesn't want to see the major cities trying to fight back against this evil. That's not his
He's already
bag.
put whatever idea out there, and now it's time for another idea.
He made the movie he wanted to make. And
It didn't really, like, for example, I guess you're kind of delving into it, this rejection or this mechanism, whatever it is, manifests itself in a variety of different ways, like why Don went totally homicidal, and other guys just ran out naked.
It seemed to affect some people and not others. Connie Nelson, James LaGrosse, and Ron Perlman, they started acting a little bit hanky, but they seemed to fend off the madness better than the rest of them. Everyone else basically ended up going crazy. Or
I think that was
one guy just randomly died of a nosebleed.
Is that right?
So there's not a consistent thing that's going on, but I think the idea that we're to get clasp onto is that yes, something came out of the thaw, whatever it is, clearly supernatural, so clearly with purpose, and that purpose is to get rid of us because we're just doing too much damage. Now, that's what I took from it, and it worked enough for me. I'm gonna totally cop to being biased for Larry Fessenden. I like the man. I'm a fan of him as an actor and a writer and a director. I also think that this is an ambitious horror movie. I think that I will agree with you that it has some of the best scares of all of these movies, but it also has the fewest. But I also would argue that it stayed with me more than any of the rest of these movies, and I thought about it more than any of the rest of these movies. I just want to give it props for originality, period. I think it's such a rare commodity to have originality to a horror movie. All of the other movies in the list, and I like most of them quite well, I can compare to something else,
It's funny because this is the least amount I've written down. I think this is the most we've talked about.
Absolutely. Again, I think that's further evidence to the movie's credit. All right, Tanner, that's 6 cold horror movies that we have just reviewed, which now puts us in the point where we're going to rank them. There are prizes potentially at stake here for you, brothers. So I'm curious to hear where you landed on this. What was your least favorite of the movie?
We do come from it from slightly different angles.
Yeah.
I do go to be entertained, and I think you do too.
Yeah.
What we find entertaining is a bit different, and for sundry different reasons. And I do like the aesthetic, and I never go to a movie wanting to rip it apart.
Yeah.
Because if I want to rip it apart, then I don't want to see it. So I do go to be lost in whatever the story is, and when I'm taken out of it, then I'm critical.
Right.
But until I am, I do go to watch them and enjoy them as they do. But you've given me some different things to think about of the movies that I've seen and ranked, but I'm still going to go with the ranking I had, because that's based on what I thought at the time. And the other thing about it was the 6 that you gave to me, it's not that there's a huge difference between 1 and 6.
Yeah.
They all had their merits, and so I just want to throw that out there as well, that there's not like the one at the bottom is just absolutely god-awful, and the one at the top is a pristine bit of cinema.
That's just where they ended up.
Just going to sip of beer here while I think about it. Okay.
I'll point the gun away from you if that'll make you more comfortable.
So, I'm not going to say that there are any bad ones. And so I'm going to say least favorite.
Fair enough.
Was Dead Snow.
Okay.
And now that, and again, I watched those a long time ago, and what's more fresh with me right now is what we've just discussed. So that's maybe not where I'd rank it today if I were to do it. That's where I ranked it at the time. Second least
Number
favorite.
5.
Number 5.
Yeah.
Was Frozen.
Okay.
Number 4 was Wind Chill. Well, and like I said, I really liked it for a lot of reasons, but sometimes it's, for me, it's the aesthetic and the way it looks.
Yeah.
And I mean, story has to be foremost, but if the graphics are just jarring, again, it takes me out of it, and it's like, okay, well, that's a point against.
It's a little removed.
Third was Cold Prey.
Okay.
And then our runner-up was Last Winter, and number 1 was 30 Days of Night.
That's not bad. We're pretty close, brother. We're pretty
Really?
close. I mean, I'm not giving out any prizes today. But,
I didn't think you would.
I put as my least favorite to be Frozen. Now, I say that, and I do like the movie. I did find myself asking hard questions of the movie sometimes, like we talked about the cable and the issues and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think it's the premise more than almost everything else that I really like about this movie. In that, like I said, it seems like a trap that anybody could find themselves.
It could just be there, so there's a sense of realism to it. Yeah.
So that's why I watched it there. So ranking at number 5 is where I put Wind Chill. Again, a lot of stuff that I like about it, but I do think that there are some ouches to the screenplay. I don't know why they're nameless characters. If I can't think of a reason, then it becomes distracting, you know?
Right.
And I can't. Maybe someone could tell me. Maybe someone will write me something and convince me why. But that is one of the main things. That and the last minute ghost rescue. But for the most part, I actually was really liking this movie. Again, it frustrates me to put it that low, but that's where it is. In 4th place, that's where I put Dead Snow. And again, this goes to me talking about what is this movie trying to accomplish. And I think this movie was trying to keep you engaged. You don't want to be bored at any point in this movie. And they wanted you to be, you know, like a fun, crazy, violent horror movie. And I think that they were, across the board, successful in what they set out to do. I, as a rule, like my horror movies to have some little more teeth, a little bit, be scary. Scare me if you're a horror movie. But I completely believe that there is room for the Evil Dead 2s of the world. And I think this is sort of in that canon. Coldplay made it to number 3. And this is all the production value. The execution of it is what really elevates it. Familiar characters in a familiar place being stalked by a killer that's not completely original, but the execution is very strong. The suspense works in it. Again, what were they trying to do, and how well did they achieve it? Controversially, I'm putting 30 Days of Night at number 2. I would probably not argue that it wasn't the best made of all these films. I think it's clearly the best executed, like, looking cinematography, achievement in film. It's the prettiest and flashiest of them. But for all the prettiness and flash, it's a little emptier than maybe it seems.
Did you read the book or the graphic novel before you saw the movie?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes I wonder if
I would say the same thing about the book too. It's more about the art than it is about the story. For me.
No. That's not where I was going. But sometimes it's a matter of which one you're exposed to first,
right?
Or I mean, because there's the cliche about go see the movie, then get the book,
right?
Because the book is
more
generally perceived to be better,
yeah,
all the time, every time. But I also think that sometimes there's in music, for example, people will hear a cover song and then they'll hear the original, and then prefer the cover song, whereas people who heard the original first will prefer the original. And sometimes I wonder what effect that the initial exposure has on the decision of what's the best execution of it.
Yeah.
Like, because I heard growing up when I did "Smoking in the Boys' Room" by Motley Crue,
right.
I heard that before I heard the original. They're not really that much different, but I still kind of lean towards the Motley Crue one.
Because that's your first experience.
Yeah, and so I'm kind of curious what sort of effect that might have.
I'm less worried about it with graphic novels and stuff like that in the comic book medium. I mean, it's because comics are a visual medium as well. There will always be the book and the comic. If they really fuck up a novel in the movie, they've like just raped that novel. And the way the world works now, more people are going to see the movie than they're going to read the book, and that sucks if it's a really juicy book. So,
or like Catch-22, which really doesn't ever
again,
become.
I will defend the movie Catch-22, but I won't say that it captures the book. You know, I do believe that books are books and movies are movies. I understand that things need to change, but you need to keep the essence of the book there, or else why bother? It drives me crazy when they get into big bidding wars over properties and then spend millions of dollars to acquire the rights and then fail to tell the fucking story in the book.
Yes.
It blows my mind, and it happens a lot. Anyway, just to wrap up the list, I'm maybe showing my hand for a personal bias to Larry Fessenden, who I am a big fan of. But I'm giving number one spot to The Last Winter. I think it's the one that if you haven't seen of this list of movies that I would probably most encourage you to see. And I would also say, I'm biased. This is my wheelhouse. I like a movie that works my nerves, and I like a movie that tries something new. And I think this does both of those. Successfully
it did that.
Yeah.
I guess we just both weighed them a bit differently, but it certainly did that. I will agree with you.
Yeah. And how successfully is it probably going to be a matter of taste. And I will, I'll say frankly, I might like this movie more than a lot of other people too. I think it just sort of played to my tastes,
Yeah.
I give big points for originality, and more people support Larry Fessenden. Keep the man working. That's all I'm saying.
So we can finally get it right.
No prizes. Sorry, brothers.
No, that's all right.
So
I didn't even know there were prizes.
Yeah,
I was just going to do it anyway.
I'm just like, I'm confident someday someone's going to win. This is episode 26, as I've said. And,
episode 26. I love that. And
only one win so far out of 26 episodes. So I gotta up the win. I feel like I'm playing a rigged game here. But I do
like
appreciate
the fact
you doing
it. And I don't know, you can probably cut this out at some point, but episode 26 is a fantastic play that I got to see you in.
Yep.
Playing Zugdish, and it won the audience favorite, wasn't it?
Yeah.
At the, I don't know what year it was though.
Oh God,
2000
nothing maybe 2000-ish. I don't know.
But yeah, and a funny script and well acted by you and Kevin, Brad, Lorianne,
bunch of people
Aaron,
these guys don't know.
And just really well put together. I just no one else could have been here. Well, no one else was here to see it. But when Larry said it was episode 26, I actually threw my hands up in the air because it was such an auspicious and ridiculously meaningless callback. But it was still awesome.
That's what I'm all about, meaningless callbacks. Is there anything you would like to say to the kids on the interwebs, or anything you want to sell, any projects, or you want to put yourself out there? If someone wanted to see a picture of your genitalia, is there a website you could...
Well, I was going to say that, I've done... This is my first podcast.
Well done. I broke your podcast, Jerry.
Yeah. And but I've done a little bit of film work. I've done a little bit of voiceovers and stuff like that. And I have to say, to date, I've never had anyone affix a mic to my lapel and put the battery pack near my genitals as kindly as you did. So thank you.
I like to think I'm surprisingly gentle.
Yes, because you're a big dude. And it went off like a hitch.
All right. I can think of no better way to end this podcast. Thank you for doing this. And so it was that episode 26 was pushed bloody and screaming out into the world. I'd like to once again thank my friend Robbie Tanner for helping me out with this episode, and I will apologize if there was a few bits that felt a little choppy. A lot of beer was drank, and we kind of yacked half the night away, so cuts had to be made to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. This is, of course, your host and random Canadian, Larry Parsons. Please do seek us out on Facebook and on iTunes. If you can leave a review for us there, it's really helpful in getting new people to come and listen to the show. I really appreciate all of the support for Rank and Review. So if you'd like to write us and let us know how we're doing with this podcast, you can do so at ranknreview@gmail.com. That's RANKNREVIEW@gmail. And do me a favor, tell your friends.